One of the best features of the Pokemon series is that they can just keep adding new creatures every few years to capture the original magic all over again. More dudes to collect, more tech to run, and just generally new designs to geek out over. Though there's been this sentiment throughout the community for a long while about how the new designs are less inspired than the old. Now, I don't really like to make videos about gaming community BS, and while I don't really plan on this video being entirely about that, I think it could be fun to take a retrospective, so here we are. While many people agree on the verdict, there are a multitude of different clashing reasonings that lead into it. Some say Pokemon used to be more than just animals, while others say Pokemon used to be animals and now they aren't. While some may disagree on the distance a Pokemon should hold from being quote-unquote just an animal, a quick look into any generation shows a good amount of variation. Gen 6 had both Klefki and Go-Goat, Gen 5 had both Herdier and Trubbish, Gen 1 had both Seel and Voltorb. In my experience, people who hold one of these seemingly mutually exclusive opinions actually hold both, which I imagine just comes from their natural conservatism taking over when they see something they aren't used to. When you look at Haunter and then Murkrow and then Seviper, you can see a slow evolution of the art over time. However, if you jump straight from Haunter to Seviper, you're going to see a sharper difference. So at the end of the day, it's a pretty understandable opinion, though I also hear that folks think it's a more fundamental flaw because, quote-unquote, the new concepts are less inspired than the old. Everyone seems to believe that Trubbish is just a garbage bag and nothing else. Game Freak must be scraping the bottom of the barrel. It's not like they're wrong, I'm not gonna defend it as high art or nothing, but this is one of the most damning things about the Gen 1er mindset. It shows a complete lack of perspective. Trubbish is part of Gen 5, where the overall theme of the region was the yin and yang between tradition and innovation. All the Pokemon in this region were actually callbacks to the old stuff everyone loves so much. Kind of an appeal to nostalgia that went unnoticed. Might explain why they got a little more heavy-handed with it in later games. In the end, whether you like both, either, or just one of these mons, they're just about as inspired as the other. They both have stuff if you look into them, so the uninspired critique is not as powerful as it's made out to be. However, if it were not for all these other voices I disagree with, I'd be making a fit about how it's ground we've already treaded. It may have something to do with age as well. To a Gen 1er, Beware is an obvious pun, but Executor is not. You'll never notice gags that you missed as a kid. That's why people get their minds blown when you point out that Ekans backwards is Snake. It's a joke they took at face value a billion years ago and they're only just getting it. Another stance would argue that the later generations just don't look like Pokemon. Again, I imagine this comes from the perspective of somebody being dropped into a new generation without being acclimated to the change in the art from the previous link in the chain. However, even despite the obvious advancements in the artistic process, new artists, and even the evolution of motifs over time, you can still see some straight lines in the designs. For example, would it surprise you that the same artist who drew Eevee, this cute little fox thing with a bushy mane, also drew this other cute little fox thing with a bushy mane? Same deal with these two electric floating Orby guys. There are a ton of little signatures to each artist that you can track over time, for example these weird bulgy joints you find on Deoxys or Darkrai, or even something as simple as the way birds are drawn with two layers of differently colored feathers to add depth. That said, to say that the art's never changed in any meaningful way to alienate fans would be naive, so let's get to the fun part of the video, a complete analysis of the evolution of artistic motifs and trends in Pokemon designs over the years. For Gen 1, I'm going to focus more on this type of manga art because I feel this doesn't really represent this which was already drawn prior. As you can see, the critter is drawn in black and white and then shaded in with color. So if you look, the area where the light is most intense is still white. It's very watercolory and the color choices are real pastel. This style continued into Johto, but the primary difference between the two games are these neat new colors. Gen 2 took a step away from pastel and added more vibrant stuff like Spinarak's green, Scizor's red, and Furret's browns. Also, with the inclusion of dark types, there are now Pokemon that use black as their primary color. I really like how the color gradients all the way from black to white, but you'll notice these guys look especially different in later games. Back in Kanto, black was really only used for stuff like Golbat's mouth, where they didn't want to draw gross mouth parts, or for things like Tangela and Shellder, where it's supposed to be kind of a mystery what you're looking at. Since a completely black creature would mess with the black outlines and everything, you'll notice that these mons have kind of become off-black, if that's a word you want to use, and now black is usually used to put more emphasis on other colors. For example, Luxray and Rampardos wouldn't really be described as predominantly black because it's used in such a way to make the blues more striking. Anyways, the watercolory trend unfortunately had to die because that style doesn't really work in animation. Kind of a shame, but whatever. The style that emerged in Hoenn became what we think of as Pokemon today. Not all bad, since Hoenn added a lot of darker shades like Blaziken's red and Wishcash's blue to kind of mimic the darker shades of the watercolor art, and Absol, Shelgon, Glalie, Gardevoir, and Pelipper to mimic the whites. White was never really a dominant color prior to this, besides Seal and Dugong, who break all the rules, and was mostly used to make another color seem more majestic, like with Butterfree and Seaking. Traditionally, most Pokemon are usually no more than 3 colors plus black and white for outlines and teeth and stuff. Now that the watercolor style has been abandoned though, and black and whites are being used as substance instead of background, it allows for more detail. This gives the illusion that modern Pokemon use more colors, which means they look more complex nowadays. You describe Luxray as black on blue, but you wouldn't describe Tangela as blue on black. This technique of using black to make blue pop was especially noticeable in Sinnoh, which also introduced these little designs all over the place. We've seen details like this before in things like Kadabra's symbols and Arcanine's stripes, but for whatever reason it's just more common now. Notice how Roserade has a bunch of black lines dividing the shades on its body, while each piece of blossom is its own color. On one hand, I think I prefer the simpler designs, but I think these details give you a better idea of what kind of texture you're looking at. These black dots on Lairon emulated Cheese Grater, which helps it look rigid, and Perugli's disorganized stripes make him look unkempt and ungroomed. Other Pokemon use these details to add little bits of character to their design. Look at how the different white little bib things on Pokemon like Empoleon, Lickilicky, and Honchkrow each say something different about their personality. It's an improvement over Tentacool and Tentacruel, where you can't really tell if their skin is squishy like a jellyfish or resilient like armor. Though on the other hand, there are also Pokemon that just have these little details just because they kinda look empty without them. Another big development that showed up in Sinnoh was the legendaries. It was a bit of a shark jump. Johto's mythology had escalated into Hoenn's world-forming god beasts, but Sinnoh just kind of looped around again where land and sea escalated into time and space. Groudon and Kyogre's abilities reflect their place in the universe, but time and space just translate to moves with big damage. It would have been cooler if Roar of Time actually rewound time. Either way, there was just this loop of big angry dragons who didn't like each other for a while, which only just petered out in maybe X and Y. Though I don't think it's controversial at all to say that Groudon and Kyogre are leagues beyond the rest. I imagine the secret to recapturing that lightning would be doing something that we hadn't seen before. I thought the Island Guardians versus the otherworldly Ultra Beasts was pretty neat as a metaphor for clashing cultures or whatever. And I think it worked much better than the struggle between tradition and innovation, just being represented by angry dragon people. Perhaps the future of legendary Pokemon lies in multiple smaller mons with more complex personalities and relationships, as if it were an actual mythology. Bit of a tangent, let's move on to Unova, which was very divisive. The big calling card for these mons is that they have sharp angles with round edges. Darmanitan is a circle, but nearly every time two lines connect, it's acute. Rufflet has round eyes, surrounded by spiky feathers, surrounded by fluffy feathers, followed by a single sharp feather. Also, if you look carefully, you'll notice that Ferroseed is a spiky ball. The end result is that everything looks a little Dragon Ball-y, which I think works out well for its cool, majestic guys, but doesn't really pan out if you're trying to be weird, cute, or cartoony. This style did translate well to pixel art, but that translated poorly to animation. Prior to Unova, animation was usually just a few frames per Pokemon as an intro, but now they just kinda constantly move around. This image wasn't too bad for stills, but in animation it brought your eyes to the individual pixel rather than the whole image, which kinda worked to everything's detriment. So in order to fix that problem, Pokemon added a third axis. 3D models can be animated way more easily than still images, so it's a good fit for a franchise where you need a lot of different critters moving around. Pokemon X and Y wasn't the first 3D Pokemon game though. They've been around since 1999. They've shortened a lot of the animations in X and Y for the timeliness of the gameplay, and whilst I am disappointed that many Pokemon lose their characterization, I believe this was the smart move in the long haul. The limited power of the 3DS is a bother, dropping frames and doubles, but other than that, it looks like the transition went pretty well. All the Pokemon look just like they did in 2D, and since you can spin the model around, you get a better sense of what you're looking at. Also, animations help end the blood wars about what we're looking at. Carvanha has a mouth, but Poliwhirl doesn't. Peace at last. The biggest issue of the transition is that 3D models lose the implied action behind sprites. You can't imply fast movement or intense emotion when all these Pokemon look like they're impatiently waiting for an elevator. Look at all the fire types. Typhlosion and Darmanitan, who used to look super angry and hyped up, now just look impatient to get to their turn. Rapidash's billowing mane now looks super bored. Also, look at the flying types. They just kinda lazily flap their wings. Look at Xatu. They tried to imply movement by putting him to a glide, but since he isn't actually moving, it just looks off. Plus the old one looked awesome. You'd hit him and you'd get a glimpse of what he's hiding under his wings, and then you'd knock him out like a bowling pin, and it was pretty sick. There are some Pokemon which were never meant to be viewed in 3D space though. Ghastly's eyes are supposed to float just off his face to make him look scarier than just some Fartork, but that doesn't work when there's a free camera. Now we can finally see the back of his eyeballs are just painted black. Compare that to Minior, who was designed for 3D space. His eyes are not physically connected to his face either, but it's more stylized because they know you could be looking from any angle. They lean into it by making everything rotate, which is probably the key difference. One of them is style and the other one's just an oversight. On the flip side, Spiritomb works really well in 3D. While he is just a two-dimensional face coming out of a rock, the intensity of his movements sell him as a wacky, cartoony ghost creature. He's kinda allowed to get away with more than Pokemon who operate around a skeleton, and I bet there would be some way to rework Ghastly in a similar way. 3D art and decent animation wasn't Kalos' only course correction though. Unova had a lot of sharp lines and subtle fan service, but since it wasn't received all that well, you'll notice that the Pokemon in Kalos are extra round and cartoony. They're certainly more smiley and fun than the Unova edgelords. But at the same time, there's Mega Evolutions, which kinda felt out of place. All these guys, with maybe 3 or 4 exceptions that were added later, are all very serious and very detailed. I do enjoy the extra flair as it sells this Pokemon as something special compared to the others on your team, but I get the impression that the devs are being pulled in 2 different directions. Some may believe Unova was poorly received because the fan service was too subtle, while others believe that the designs were too sharp. Now Team A is working on new, friendlier designs, while Team B is appealing to nostalgia. I understand the appeal of Team B, but I don't like being pandered to. Charizard was already perfect, you didn't need to change it. This trend continued into Alola, but it's a bit better now. There's no new Mega Evolutions, and it feels like Game Freak is kinda burying their existence in favor of Alolan forms. I much prefer the concept of a divergent species over Digi-evolutions, not to mention it makes more sense than whatever you want to call Electivire and Magmortar. But again, in practice these guys feel off. Colors in Alola are very straightforward. Reds are red, yellows are yellows, and pinks are pink. The only exceptions might be greens and browns, which are usually either extra deep or extra light. Just as Sinnoh was really into blue and black, Alola's into black and white. Nearly everything is white, or black, or both. These Alolan color rules apply to the Alolan forms instead of the Kanto color rules, which shouldn't be a problem, but the extra details they added mess with the original art direction. Alolan Marowak is exactly the same, but with flames, different colors, and a detail on its forehead. Look how the original's body guides you with horizontal lines to the skull, which in turn guides you to the eye. There's a focal point. You can see the intensity in the implied motion tells that you're about to be bone meringue. Here in Alola though, this little detail moves your eye back up, which makes the fire the focal point, and the Pokemon kinda just gets lost in the shadows. Same problem with Muk. The focus used to be this black spot in the middle of the purple blob, but now everything is all over the place. Tried to fix something that wasn't broken, and they broke it. The best of the bunch are the ones that are either really simple or the ones that maintain their original colors. If they could just get the new style to work with the old art, I think Divergent Species will be a cool way to keep the old stuff new. Like, instead of remaking remakes, they can just revisit old designs, though I worry that'll only double down on how much pandering Game Freak will be doing. If they continue with this angle, or something similar, and manage to make those few adjustments, I'd bet we'd see some cool stuff. I'm given some confidence by the way they've treated poses in the new style. Gen 6 and Gen 7 lost a lot of opportunities to sell you on a Pokemon's personality compared to Stadium and Coliseum, but looking at all the thought put into the Alolan starters, I bet they'll find ways to get that stuff in later games. Refresh is a good start, and I know I griped about Marowak earlier, but I won't diss the dance. I also really like the style of the new anime, or maybe just call it a cartoon now. I hope it encourages games to have more animations that aren't just moving around a skeleton, like JoJo punches and Dust Cloud fights, which we can already kinda see surfacing in certain moves. Other than that, my only hope would be that future games use more creative color palettes like what they did with Gen 1's oranges, Gen 3's whites, and Gen 6 and 7's pinks, rather than relying on Sinnoh's blacks and Alola's reds, which I don't think work as well. Oh, and they should try and keep designs a bit simpler. They shouldn't be so afraid of smooth surfaces. Whatever comes up next for Pokemon, you can catch the breakdown back here. Till then, post your favorite pedantic details about your favorite designs. This video took forever to make, and I feel like I can't help but leave more out than I possibly could put in, so it'd probably be better to just start a discussion in the comments. What's your favorite design, and what's your favorite version of that design? How do you feel about that Pokemon's glacial evolution over time? I'm genuinely curious, and if you post something, I'll see it for sure. For me, I really like the original Grimer sprite. That's a bit more personality than the ones that came after it. I also really liked Stadium's version of Kangaskhan since it was just absurdly expressive and active. and Platinum's version of Skunting, since you could line up different attack animations with it for comedic results. Hope this gives some perspective towards a 20-year-old franchise and doesn't just come across as some incidental trivia.